Here's my credit card, your vacation is on me. The words cut through the hum of the restaurant like a whip crack. My mother, Margaret, smiled brightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. That same smile she'd always worn when she meant to spend my money. The family laughed, the kind of polite, knowing laughter that felt more like collusion than amusement. All eyes landed on me, expectant, warm, demanding. For a moment, the pattern on the tablecloth seemed to blur beneath my plate. Then something shifted. Across the table, my cousin Emily exchanged a glance with her husband, then spoke. "Mom." The single word struck the room like a trumpet note in silence. Margaret choked mid-sip. Her Chardonnay tipped from her glass, splashing across the white linen. She coughed, sputtered, her face paling as she realized she'd been called out. Emily's voice didn't waver. "I think you mean this is your daughter, the one who works 60 hours a week to support her own kids." The sound hit like a hammer. The laughter evaporated. Other diners turned, curious. My sister Grace shot Emily a glare sharp enough to cut glass. My father, who had been chuckling, suddenly became engrossed in the serrated edge of his steak knife. And in that silence, I felt it for the first time in 36 years, the weight had shifted. I wasn't the exposed one anymore. Birthdays in my family had always been minefields. My father's 65th was no exception, staged at a Chicago steakhouse dripping with chandeliers and polished silver. My mother thrived in the spotlight, especially when it highlighted her own generosity, at my expense. I chose my outfit deliberately, a simple black dress, understated, a silver locket from my late grandmother around my neck. My life had taught me that blending in was safer than standing out. Margaret, 63 and sharper than ever, lived for these moments. From my first paycheck onward, she'd dubbed me her little bank, her safety net, the one who never refused. My older siblings, louder, more charming, earned her praise. I learned to carry the weight silently, like a pillar under a roof, never expecting acknowledgement. Years of quietly footing their bills had forged steel in me. I paid for Grace's influencer boot camp. I fixed my parents' leaky roof. I co-signed my brother's car after yet another accident. I did it without hesitation. If they couldn't honor me for who I was, I'd stop giving them reasons to be disappointed. So I showed up to dinners, wrote the checks, smiled politely, kept my overtime and sacrifices to myself. I was just Kendall, the daughter who could be counted on. And then came this birthday. When Margaret launched into a pitch about a last-minute cruise, my stomach tightened. Her excitement was audible, almost theatrical, and it landed squarely on me and my wallet. But this time, something had changed. This time, someone else had spoken, and suddenly, the room had a new understanding. If you love real emotional stories, hit subscribe, we post one every day. This is Kendall, my walking ATM. Margaret puffed up her chest, pronouncing the words like a crown. The table erupted with laughter. Not everyone laughed, but enough did, and that was the cruelest part. Laughter spreads like wildfire. People don't always mean it, but they follow along because silence feels worse. My face burned. My heart hammered. Part of me wanted to run. Another part wanted to strike back. But I didn't have to. Emily did it for me. "What do you mean, Aunt Margaret?" Margaret froze, dabbing at the spilled wine on the tablecloth, her confusion genuine, as if being questioned were impossible. Emily's voice stayed firm. "It's Dad's birthday. We're here to celebrate him, not to put Kendall on the spot for a $3,200 cruise deposit." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Grace broke it first. "Oh my God, Emily, it's a joke. Relax." "Was it, really?" Emily asked, her gaze settling on me. It didn't sound like a joke, it sounded like a demand. Margaret's face hardened. She looked at me, fury mixed with entitlement, waiting for me to smooth things over, apologize for Emily, write the check, and restore the peace. But I remembered another time. 2 weeks ago, my car had spun across the highway before slamming into a guardrail. My hands shook as I texted the family chat from the ER, car crash. Need someone to pick up the kids. Silence. Grace eventually replied, not with help, but with spa selfies. Margaret and my father had seen the message, the little red receipts glaring back, and chosen silence. Emily, however, left work early, picked up Leo and Maya, and took them for pizza. I felt the satisfying click of a lock inside me. One word left my lips. No. People imagine devastation as sudden and loud, but often it's patient. It teaches you to shrink, to fade, to take up no space until you are just a whisper in your own life. I grew up just outside Chicago, in a suburb where neighbors knew every dog's name and the garbage schedule. My father managed logistics with precision, but people. Not so much. Systems were fixed, hurt children were ignored. His method: ignore, deflect, move on. By high school, I was the responsible one. Not by choice, but necessity. Margaret tried to steer life with grand gestures and tight budgets, patched together with hope and credit cards. She loved loudly, bankrupted quietly. The combination left me feeling invisible. Sundays were lectures on family and unity, Mondays were requests for a few $100s, always disguised as bills but usually shopping trips. Invisibility became safety. If I could not earn praise, I could be useful. At 16, I got a job, paying for my own school supplies and clothes. Margaret leaned on my income while mocking my thrift. "You'd be so much funnier if you weren't always saving," she once said in front of friends. I learned to pretend, to smile, to make myself small. I went to a state school, worked 2 jobs, graduated debt-free. She boasted about my independence, conveniently leaving out the car insurance and extra expenses I covered. My first corporate job wasn't my achievement in her eyes, it was a new line of credit. "We're a family," she'd say. But it was always a one-way street. The car crash should have ended the cycle. It was a Tuesday. I texted the family group from the ER. My message was short, raw: need help. Kids. Urgent. The silence that followed was deafening. Hours later, Grace's post appeared, a boomerang of 2 cocktails clinking, captioned, "Treat yourself Tuesday." It wasn't oversight, it was choice. Sitting at that dinner, hearing Margaret prattle about non-refundable cruise deposits while my body ached and bruises still colored my skin, I didn't just get angry. I went numb. That chill settled in my bones, permanent where warmth had once been. My name is Kendall. I'm 36. A mother to Leo, 10, and Maya, 7. For my whole adult life, I'd been the family's backbone. I had assumed that's what being a backbone meant. I was wrong. The fallout began within 24 hours. Grace started, sending a link to an outrageously priced handbag. Minutes later, "Mom said you were being difficult about the cruise, and Emily is such a witch. Everything okay?" Transparent manipulation, insulting in its simplicity. I left both messages unread. My new boundary was quiet. Then came my father, with a long, rambling text about family loyalty, helping one another, painting me as the unreasonable villain punishing his heartbroken wife over a harmless request. I read it and felt nothing but a hollow ache. He had always sided with Margaret, always chosen the path of least resistance, even when it cut through my well-being. The performance peaked when Grace posted on her Instagram story in dramatic black and white, "It hurts when you realize you've been nurturing a dead plant all along." The irony stung. They cast themselves as neglected flowers while oblivious to the rot they had planted. I assumed the conflict would remain petty, emotional, a mix of guilt trips and passive-aggressive posts. I was wrong. A week later, the escalation came. The principal from Leo's school called. Gentle but firm, she explained that someone had made an anonymous report to Child Protective Services. My stomach dropped. The complaint alleged two things: first, that my children were left alone in unsafe conditions; second, that I had a substance problem and was misusing prescription pain medication from the accident. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly who had called. Only Margaret, Grace, and my mother's closest confidants knew the prescription's name. I'd mentioned it to Margaret during a phone call, not to ask for help, but to appease her complaints. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was leverage. They weren't asking for money, they were threatening my children to get it. A line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The family I had believed in was gone. In its place, strangers ready to destroy my life for a cruise. That night, fear and fury coiled inside me. I acted. Years ago, I had started a full financial audit of my life. The malicious call was not just a threat, it was a spark. I dove into reports, bank statements, credit histories, untangling every thread of financial control I had permitted. My hands were steady. My mind, sharp as a frozen winter sky. Analysis was my skill, my gift, the ability to detect patterns, to find signal amid noise. For the first time, I turned my analytical skills on my own life. That's when I found it: a credit card opened 6 months earlier with a major bank I didn't use. My name was on the account, and listed as an authorized user was my sister, Grace. The balance was over $12,000. I scrolled through the statement, my chest tightening with every line. The charges told a story: boutique hotels in the city, dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, and a constant stream of designer purchases. Every perfectly curated social media post, every staged photo, had been funded by my credit. A cold, sharp clarity settled over me. She hadn't just relied on my generosity, she had stolen my identity to bankroll her fantasy life. This was no longer about family fights or borrowed money. This was identity theft. A crime. And the evidence had been handed to me on a silver platter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Emotional reactions were finished. Every move from that moment was precise and calculated. First, I called a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud, Miss Ashford. Her voice was calm, steady, immovable. She listened without interruption and then said, "You've documented everything we need." Second, under her guidance, I filed a detailed police report, citing identity theft. The officer who took my statement had that weary, knowing look. "Happens more than people think," he said, shaking his head. "Sometimes, the people closest to you cause the deepest harm." Third, I froze my credit with all 3 major bureaus. It felt like building a wall I could finally trust. Then I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a post for my private Facebook page, the one connected to family, neighbors, and community friends. I was methodical. I didn't use names. I didn't need to. I outlined a precise, emotionless timeline: the car crash, my plea for help, Grace's spot A posts, Margaret's public demand for cruise money at the birthday dinner, the guilt-tripping texts, the malicious anonymous call to Leo's school, and finally, the fraudulent credit card discovery with attached receipts. I posted screenshots side by side, my desperate messages, Grace's champagne boomerang, a redacted copy of the time-stamped school call log, and the credit card statement showing thousands spent on luxury goods, paired with images from her Instagram feed flaunting those exact items. I hit post. The impact wasn't gradual. It exploded across the carefully manicured image of my family's reputation. Revelations cascaded immediately. A cousin admitted Grace had borrowed $2,000 and never repaid it. A former family friend questioned a suspicious GoFundMe. My parents' emergency plumbing fund, which had never existed, was finally exposed. The facade didn't just crack, it disintegrated, revealing a pattern of deception in full view. The consequences came fast. Grace's brand partners dropped her within 48 hours. My parents quietly removed their dubious GoFundMe page. The social fallout shredded their polished image. Margaret called me, sobbing, not apologizing, but demanding. "Take the post down. You're destroying the family name," she cried, voice thick with self-pity. "There's nothing left to destroy," I said. And for the first time, I hung up on her. A few days later, Ms. Ashford sent a formal cease and desist to Grace for the identity theft, along with notices that the credit card company and local authorities were investigating. Grace's social media accounts vanished. The relentless demands for money stopped. The quiet was intoxicating. Within 3 months, the house of cards they had built on my income and credit completely fell apart. Without my support, they lost their home to foreclosure. Margaret's fragile pride shattered with the notice taped to the front door. Grace, stripped of her influencer earnings and drowning in debt, had to move back in with them into a small rental apartment across town. My life, by contrast, grew smaller, simpler, and peaceful. It centered on Leo, Maya, my work, and my chosen family, Emily and Ben. We started a Sunday night dinner tradition. Our laughter filled spaces that used to be crowded with tension. One evening, Maya looked up from her drawing and said, "I love how calm our house is now." That single word, calm, felt like a reward worth more than any apology I would never receive. With my finances finally under my control, I started college funds for Leo and Maya and opened my first real investment account. My future was finally my own. 6 months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, one sentence, written in Margaret's familiar scrawl: "You destroyed this family." I felt nothing, no anger, no guilt, no sadness. I walked to the kitchen and shredded it. I hadn't destroyed a family. I had simply stopped being the foundation holding up a decaying structure. When it finally collapsed under its own weight, I was free. If you've stayed with me to the end, consider this: think about the boundaries you set with the people you love. Do they respect them, or constantly try to erase them? If you've ever felt like a walking ATM, remember this: you are not defined by the demands of your family. You are defined by the moment you claim your worth as non-negotiable. The greatest lesson I've learned: people who belong in your life don't require begging to show up. And it's more than okay to show the rest of them the door. If this story resonates, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this, each one a reminder that dignity can be reclaimed, even after decades. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I want to see how far a story of resilience can reach.